I'm extremely honored to introduce Christopher Wang. He's the most poetic and multifaceted fisherman I ever met.
Christopher has been salmon fishing in the Bristol Bay every summer for 10 years now. Living with the tides, following the fish in this giant bay, he brings salmon, one of the last wild resources, to us all here today. Christopher is also the founder of Gypsy Fish Company, a community-supported fishery in Marin County.
Shout out to Peru for creating such a cool thing through real food, real stories. So usually when I tell people what I do for work, I'm a commercial fisherman in Alaska. They'll ask me two things. They'll ask me one of two things. They'll be like, is that kind of like America's Deadliest Catch? And then they'll ask me, they'll say something like, oh, I hear that's really dangerous. And my response is usually like, if it's a beautiful woman and I'm trying to impress her, I'll be like, yeah, that's dangerous. It's really dangerous. But usually it's not. Like what I usually say is, it's kind of dangerous. But really it's actually not dangerous so much as it's unfamiliar. So then the next thing they usually ask me is, well, how long you've been doing that? And I've been like 10, 15 years. And then the next thing they ask me, well, how did you get started? And that is a good story. So I grew up in central New York. My parents are Chinese immigrants, so I'm first generation Chinese. And this is before the internet was like saturated everywhere, so I got a book. You know, remember those books? I got a book, and it was called The Essential Backpacker's Guide to Alaska or something. And in it was like one page that was about getting jobs in Alaska. And then I flew to Alaska 3 weeks later. Like I didn't know what exactly I was gonna do. I thought I was gonna I knew I wanted to work in the fishing industry for some reason, but I packed for every eventuality. So like, you imagine the biggest backpack, right? I got that on my back. And then I got another backpack in front, you know, the ones you wear backwards, like the day pack. So I got like 2 huge packs, show up in Alaska, and I'm hitchhiking around. So I hitchhiked down to Seward. Seward, Alaska is this town that rests sort of at the tip of this bay, which is called Resurrection Bay. Really, really dramatic. The mountains come right out of the water, and there's these huge white-capped mountains coming right out of the water, and the water is like the deepest blue that you've ever seen because there's all this glacial silt in the water. So I ended up in Seward, and I set my tent up at sort of the edge of town. There's this like a municipal campground down there, and now I gotta find work. And so the way to find work down there, everyone was telling me, you gotta go and like just go down to the docks and ask for work. So it would go like, I would go to each boat every day, twice a day, and like sort of knock on the hull. Someone would come over, some really gruff looking guy would look over the side and be like, yes. And I'd be like, you guys, you know, I'd be in like my brand new Carhartt, so they're still like dark brown. You guys looking for a deckhand? And he'd be like, no. Or they'd be like, do you have any experience? And I'd be like, no, but I'm a fast learner. You know? So I ended up fishing for the rest of the summers that I was in college. And then when I finished college, I was like, okay, I'm finished with college. You know, it's like, and up until that point, my whole life has been sort of prescripted for me. I met this guy, and he was like, hey, I'm a commercial fisherman in Alaska. He was like, you should come work for me. And I was like, okay. And he's like, my boat's kind of small. Ended up deciding to go fish in Bristol Bay with Tyone. All the time that I was fishing in Alaska when I was in college, they'd always talk about Bristol Bay, and they'd always talk about Bristol Bay. Those guys are like animals, you know? So I go up to Bristol Bay and I land, and I end up in town and fishing with Tyone, and his boat is actually small. His boat is legendary for being small and catching a lot of fish. If you can imagine the area we slept on, we live on the boats for all summer long. The space that we live in is not even high enough for us to sit all the way up. And you know, like we'd actually pull up to deliver fish sometimes, and the guys at the tender would be like, oh, the cash flow. Like, where do you guys sleep in there? You know? So the way that the season works with Bristol Bay is, I usually get up there in the end of May, and we sort of get our nets together. We get the boat all ready. there's this real sense of anticipation. You know, the salmon are coming, the salmon are coming. So there's like this real communal aspect to everybody working together to get ready to go. And it's kind of unpredictable too, like the salmon show up when they show up. So it's a really anticipatory thing. Approaching the summer solstice, you know, it's like we work up until through the summer solstice. So June 21st, like you can actually see the sun kind of dip its lower lobe below the horizon and then just arc back up. Like it's daylight, you know. What's great about that and terrible about that is actually because it's light all the time, you can work all the time. So our work days are very, very long. 11 o'clock looks like AM or PM, it's really hard to discern. So like if you take a nap and someone tells you it's 10 o'clock when you go out back out on deck, I don't even know like how long I've slept because it could be night, it could be day. The way I usually gauge it is probably we're sleeping like 2, 3, or 4 hours a day. And it's like one of the most grueling things. Like it's just this, from the beginning to the middle, the end is just like this blur. With Tyon's boat, there's no space to hang out under the deck. So you're out on deck all day long and it's, you know, exposed to whatever elements there are, the wind, rain. And one of the things that's so special about being out there, and the salmon are actually leading us, you know, along. We're actually in a supernatural cycle of like following these tides, chasing these salmon, and also like studying the bathymetry of what's under us. So we're setting off of these sandbars. And Bristol Bay is a really huge area. To actually do this well, you actually have to be really in tune with what the salmon are doing. The Gypsy Fish Company was born out of standing on the back of my friend Tyon's boat with my friend Jacob. We always used to talk about how awesome it would be to have a freezer full of salmon and just be able to give that to our family and friends. And this was an opportunity to take that a little bit further. So I did it one year where I brought back maybe like 500 pounds. Everybody wanted it. So then I was like, oh, this is actually something that I can actually do and share, and it's something that I really believe in. Like this is actually like one of the last great wild food resources. Learning to be connected to nature, I think that's all implicitly healing in a way. The fishery in Bristol Bay is like one of the sort of the gold standard for a sustainable fishery. So we fish for salmon using something called gill nets, where we imagine a net. There's a series of meshes, they're diamond shaped, and you imagine a salmon, it can swim into this diamond and its head actually gets caught. It's called drift gill netting. Anything too small, it goes through the meshes, and anything too big usually rips the net apart. Specific what we're catching. You know, a lot of times we get into this thing of like not eating salmon because we should save it, but actually the way to like protect salmon is actually to consume it, to monetize it. And it's sort of the reality of how we live as we live right now in this society is like when it's actually valuable, the government's going to protect it. Saving Bristol Bay, there's like a $400 billion gold and copper deposit that they discovered at the headwaters of Bristol Bay. And so if they were to mine that, they would actually potentially destroy the whole fishery. And so the way that we've actually been fighting that is actually by trying to make sure that they know the monetary value of the fishery. So it's like consume salmon, you know, consume wild salmon.
Thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you for being a part of this community and hearing Chris's story. I hope you go home feeling more connected to your food.